The Declaration of Independence is the first organic law which all subsequent laws must heed. It establishes consent of the governed as a foundation of all just government civil authority. Public service requires the taking of oath to uphold the organic law so established, whereby all people hold equal status with no superior before stepping down to perform services for others, such as public service. Under said first law, no group of people can lawfully get together to strip anyone of that sovereign equality without his or her consent. The Bill of Rights establishes the moral and ethical conditions under which people may lawfully be stripped of their sovereignty and equality as only as under common law crimes. The First Amendment is the first in the Bill of Rights because it recognizes the absolute right to disassociate and associate. The first thing you do when forming any group, including a government, is to give those who are not a member of said group the absolute right not to join or participate. Those consensually associated are called statutory citizens and residents. Those not consensually associated are called non-residents and transient foreigners. If the right to contract means anything at all, it means the right to contract and every government out of the relationship between the parties and disassociate with any civil statutory status over which the government enjoys jurisdiction. When speaking of jurisdiction, you should definitely look at the 14th Amendment and understand what the 14th Amendment says. I've done a video on the 14th Amendment. That information is crucial to understanding sovereignty. The first 10 amendments of the Bill of Rights protects all sovereigns from socio-political abuse and unlawful loss of life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness, property, unless sovereigns expressly, knowingly, and willfully consent to become unequal via the disclosed agreement or found guilty of a common law crime by a jury of their peers. The Bill of Rights can only be interpreted in harmony with the intent of the writers at that time, when only common law existed. Since there were no statutes at that time, then the only crime at common law would be murder, rape, arson, theft, mayhem, treason, etc. Those are common law crimes. Those crimes require a victim. There's a lot of misconception about sovereignty, and when someone initiates the topic of sovereignty, most people automatically come to mind of a sovereign citizen. But let me assure you that a sovereign and a citizen cannot be one and the same in the same sentence. The simple fact is, a sovereign does not pay taxes. A citizen, however, pays taxes, and a citizen is a member of the corporation. And he is also an employee because a citizen pays taxes to the IRS. To refuse to associate and thereby remain a non-resident is not lawless, nor does it mean one is an anarchist, because those non-residents who do not associate are still subject to criminal law and the common law. If there is such thing as an anarchist, you could call the government the anarchist because it unconstitutionally abuses sovereign immunity, because the government gets to pick and choose what law the government wants to be subjected to. The government gets to pick and choose what laws the government is not subject to. And when it is a person, they get to pick and choose what a person is under civil law. Anyone, including the government, who can do the above is truly lawless, and that can be defined as an anarchist. If the government claims immunity, then we, the people, as co-equals, must also have it because it was delegated from we the people. Citizens have a misconception about the police, and they think that the police are required to protect them. The truth of the matter is, the so-called purpose of establishing government is to protect and serve the public, and not the individual. Check this out. Warren v. District of Columbia. Fundamental principle of the American law is that the government and its agents are generally under no duty to provide public service such as police protection to any individual citizen. The basis for paying taxes is to fund the institutionalized process of providing protection for club, members, such as citizens and residents. Those who are members of the club are parties to the social compact, which is a compact agreement, like the agreement that you sign at the DMV in exchange for your driver's license or privilege to drive. Just like the contract of your registration of your vehicle. That is also a social compact agreement. The party in the social compact agreement is the individual within the social compact and not the collective group, like law enforcement. Police have no reciprocal duty under the protection to contract to that party and therefore do not render the main consideration under that contract to the individual. This converts the contract into a compact because it is a one-sided benefit. This is because the police have no duty to the individual citizen, and yet the individual citizen is perceived as the party to the social compact. It creates a contradiction. It is a principle of contract law that all contracts are unenforceable without mutual consideration and mutual obligation. If only one party benefits, then a theft is occurring against the other party, unless the party has consented. Therefore, if police don't have a legal, enforceable obligation or duty to a specific citizen to protect them, then where does the mutual obligation arise for the individual citizen to pay for the services not rendered directly to them in the form of their taxes? Do we really have a government as legally defined if they don't have the power to protect you personally in exchange for the taxes you pay individually? This can only mean that police officers only operate upon the public domain. Police officers have a duty only to protect public property and private persons. You have to convert and donate your private property to public property to even qualify for their services. Therefore, in order to qualify for the public services, you have to convert your private property into public property. That's why you register your vehicle. That's why you register ownership, and that's why you register a title or a deed in your name, because you are converting that private property into public property upon the consent of the registration form being filled out and mailed through the service. The essence of sovereignty is that everyone has equal rights, equal dignity, and deserves equal respect and equal treatment under the law, whether a sovereign or a public servant, regardless of race, creed, nationality. The United States Supreme Court agreed when it held, no duty rests more imperatively upon the courts than the enforcement of those constitutional provisions intended to secure that equality of rights which is the foundation of free government. Free government and the above U.S. Supreme Court citation reveals that equality of rights is the guarantee of free association by consent to duty. The court reinforced that the Declaration of Independence establishes that all just powers derive from the consent of the governed. Consent to an alternative choice by voluntary free association does not mean compelled. People freely associate by instituting governments which are bound to serve only those within the said association. The free market is the only moral and ethical viable force which self-regulate towards sustainable economics and socio-political interactions in the land of the free. Public sector associations obey the same rules governing free association. Capitalism works in the private sector just as well in the public sector. Any compelled association, therefore, is a violation of equal protection and equal treatment. Yet, in the 14th Amendment, the last line, it says equal protection. If you're subject to, are you equal? No association of the several people is allowed to violate the rights of one people, and either are equal in authority and rights under the foundational or substantive laws. This is because in the land of the free, any of the people only have the power to self-govern. Said power is only power that can be delegated at different degrees of association with others. In our society of equals, with no superior, no one can delegate that which he or she does not have. If one knowingly, willfully, and freely joins an association by consenting to a statutory civil status, one acquires only contractual obligations attached to the particular association. A foreigner may get a driver's license without the automatic presumption of statutory citizen status. Any other approach leads to idolatry towards the government and turns government into an unconstitutional civil religion in which obedience is the worship, franchises are the Bible, and God being worshipped as civil rulers. Like every other type of business, government provides a product, and that product from government is protection. And no one can be forced to become a customer for that product. But don't forget, Warren v. District of Columbia, police are not required, or the government is not required to provide that product of protection in exchange for your taxes. Customers are called statutory citizens and residents. Non-customers are called non-residents and transient foreigners, and may not assume the status of a person or individual under the civil statutory law. It is a crime and unconstitutional slavery to compel people to become a customer and therefore become a statutory citizen or resident. Overall, what does sovereignty mean? It means dignity, respect, absolute equality of rights, and equality of treatment. Only being treated unequally when expressed informed consent and demonstrated with evidence. Even as a police officer, you cannot escape the sovereign responsibility of self-government. There are only two types of government: those that are civilly governed by consent, and the terrorist government. Any attempt to do any of the following is terrorism as legally defined: impose or enforce any civil status upon a non-consenting party, enforce the civil statutory laws against a non-resident, collect income taxes from non-resident parties, place conditions upon the acquisition of any government product or service that would compel or assume a specific civil status, such as statutory citizen or resident. Simply paying directly and immediately for the services outright should be sufficient to receive it. This is a privilege, and this is privilege-induced slavery. People in public service share our goals. Upon taking oath of public office, sovereigns may exercise specific delegated police powers only for the purpose of protecting private property and those freely associated. Said task is done through legal education, law enforcement, political activism, administrative activism, and legal activism. As police officers, sovereigns must learn the law and its relationship to criminal statutes. The only difference between any of the following is consent, theft, and a donation, a statutory citizen and a non-resident, a taxpayer and a non-taxpayer, rape and consensual sex. As public servants, sovereigns preserve their own interests in preventing crime by strictly observing the requirement for consent in all enforcement actions. A sovereign's job under oath is justice. Justice requires recognizing all sovereign rights, such as to be left alone, unless accused of a common law crime, according to the restrictions promulgated by the Bill of Rights. To be left alone unless one knowingly, willfully, voluntarily, freely associates under the full disclosure of the consent to the civil statutory status, such as driver, citizen, and resident. Otherwise, any compelled association would fall under the unconstitutional eminent domain and identity theft, where the public rights attached to the civil statuses are the property of the government and those identifications are stolen. Sovereigns are not elitists because they promote the equality of rights under the law, dignity, and respect for all, regardless of race, sexual orientation, or nationality, in keeping with all foundational laws of our American society. Sovereigns are not anti-government, since there would be no government instituted among the consenting sovereigns. There is no benefit to any violent overthrow of free association. Sovereigns are against monopolies on anything and provide for the enforcement of civil laws against only club members. Non-members have to be civilly left alone. Sovereigns do not deem criminal law as voluntary. Criminal law is criminal law, which one must be subjected to for their unlawful criminal actions. Sovereigns are not anarchists. They are civilly governed as co-equals by the common law, but not by statute law. A voluntary civil franchise such as the Vehicle Code requires consent. Lack of consent is not deemed as anarchistic, rather called freedom of choice and freedom of association, called an exercise of your unalienable rights, not to contract or civilly associate with the government for civil protection. Some sovereigns, under oath to public service, deceive the public to avoid procuring consent and arbitrarily decreeing codes such as franchises as law for everyone, or presume a code is a law or public law when in fact it is a voluntary franchise requiring public consent. Some sovereigns, under oath to public service, exercise the love of money to force people into commercial tax obligations without their consent, to become taxpayers or customers of a specific service. Some sovereigns, under oath to public service, fail to give reasonable notice of the requirement for consent when they make legal presentments. Some sovereigns, under oath to public service, fail to protect people's right to be left alone. Hence, equal protection is transgressed against justice and is legally defined as the right to be left alone. Some sovereigns, under oath to public service, enforce an unequal relationship, thus violate the Constitution. Some sovereigns, under oath to public service, steal by presuming a legal interest of government in all property. Property is defined as exclusive of a thing and the right to exclude all others from using, controlling, or benefiting from the use of a thing. Some sovereigns, under oath to public service, try to insert themselves as a party into every commercial transaction against the wishes of the parties to said transaction by presuming that the parties operate under a civil statutory status, such as a driver, which in fact the parties do not have or do not consent to having this, reflects an attempt to defraud under the color of law, is a direct interference with the protected right to contract for which government are instituted among men. It's no different than a stick-up of a common street criminal. Some sovereigns, under oath to public service, presume consent to additional services, although one signed up for only one specific service. Forms such as the driver's license are presumed also, unusually falsely, to identify a domicile on federal territory, identify the applicant as an agent of a particular association or organization. This includes statutory entities such as citizen, resident, driver, spouse, taxpayer, etc. None of the above should be presumed, and they should ask whether people want these things and not force them on any of the people through their deception. One cannot take a constitutional oath to support and defend equality of rights of all, and yet they refuse to recognize the right to disassociate from the club as a statutory person or citizen, instead to be a status of a statutory non-citizen national. Refuse to recognize and protect the right not to participate in a specific civil franchise. Refuse to recognize and protect the right of sovereigns not to procure a specific government service. Refuse to recognize and protect the right not to procure any specific civil statutory status, including driver, citizen, resident, etc. Refuse to recognize and protect the right to exclude the government from taxing or benefiting from the use of one's property. Property, after all, is legally defined as a right to exclude. They refuse to recognize and protect the right not to use government identifying numbers in connection with any transaction. Protection money. Forced protection through any association or organization is a racket paid for through protection money. Likewise, forced taxation by any government instituted among men can be called protection money. The only lawful government protection is of the people's right to contract or not contract for protection. The foundational or substantive laws of the land of the free disallow compelled associations such as doing business or being a club member or called a citizen or resident of a lawful government association. No foundational or substantive law allows the use of mafia-like techniques such as threats, force, lies, deception against those who object or fail to volunteer to pay a tribute with taxes, which is effectively considered protection money. How the vehicle code violates equality. License plates, driver's license, those things are considered government property. When a police officer stops a person, the first thing they ask for is evidence of such property and being in connection of commercial use on the roadways. Only when license registrations, government property, is consensually so, it can be lawfully conveyed to the rights of any government. Likewise, our time, vehicle and property are private when not so used, and thus we have the equal right to demand that government representatives procure our consent to take and use it for their benefit. Government representatives must sign up for our license to use our said property when it is private. The use of said property without said license from us is equally a violation of our anti-franchise agreement and a tort. A public officer is legally defined as someone in charge of public property. Likewise, a police officer using our time, towing our vehicles, or demanding penalties in connection with otherwise private property becomes our servant instead of the government. It goes both ways. Police officers can be off duty when they take off their uniform, but if we go off duty by removing the license plates and not using the driver license, when we are not using commercial roadways for hire, we are stopped by police for driving without a license plate, suspected of being a criminal, prosecuted for driving without license and or registration, harassed for not having a commercial relationship with the government. In other words, the government abuses the vehicle code franchise as means through to compel us to work for them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without compensation, and we are punished while off duty. It is an abuse of police powers to use policemen as revenue collectors, incentivize policemen with a commission on each ticket given, put a policeman on a stand for a civil infraction matter who has a direct or indirect financial interest in the outcome. This is a breach of public trust and conflict of interest. Arrest people who are not already public officers for refusing to get a driver's license. Give policemen access to any more guns and weaponry than the citizen themselves may obtain. This violates the equal protection and equal treatment. That is the foundation of the Constitution. When we want to terminate a driver's license, the DMV, they will say that they're the only ones that can do it. And when they terminate it, they call it a suspension. And then they make us a criminal if they catch us driving without a license from some government agent. The Department of Motor Vehicle will misrepresent the civil or penal provisions of code as law for those who never applied for a license. The Department of Motor Vehicle violate the Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate oneself by taking biometric data in connection with the license application. When we apply for a license, the Department of Motor Vehicle compels us to be a public officer in the national government by compelling the providing of a social security number. This allows them to place any burden or tax on you that they want, kidnap our legal identities, and move it to a federal territory not protected by the Constitution. Don't believe me? See Title 42, USC, subsection 1301. Trade rights for privileges, even though you don't consent. This violates the unconstitutional conditions doctrine of the United States Supreme Court. Convert private rights into public rights without consent of the owner. Institute a theft and taking in violation of the Fifth Amendment. Work a purpose opposite of that for which government are established, which is to protect private rights. The first step in that process is to keep private rights from being converted to public rights without the consent of the owner. Therefore, the Department of Motor Vehicles is not a government agency, but an anti-government agency that does the opposite of what governments are established to do. What if the citizen/government relationship has been replaced with employee/employer relationship? This is called a de facto government. Imputing or enforcing any civil status against non-consenting party is unconstitutional taking without compensation. This violates the Fifth Amendment. Attempts to enforce the driving without a license civil provisions of the Vehicle Code are simply a method to recruit people to volunteer to become uncompensated officers of the government without consent, and do so at the point of a policeman's gun. What if taxes are really just another form of protection money to procure the right to simply be left alone? Justice by a group of thugs. Police are being brainwashed by their employer to enforce a civil religion based on inequality between the government and the people. What if everything in this presentation is true? What if police raised the information in this presentation with their employer or their boss and requested a written, signed response? Do they really think that they would be terminated? And if so, are they really serving and protecting their own interests as one of the people when not in uniform? Those obeying or enforcing the law should have nothing to hide and be beyond reproach, right? What if some of the uniformed thugs are the ones sticking up and robbing people at the point of a gun, forcing them to become statutory driver franchisees? What if a white-collar boss is the one that orders the violations documented here? What if towing or confiscating the unregistered private vehicle of an unlicensed private party not driving a criminal theft? What if traffic court for those who did not consent to become drivers constitutes a unconstitutional bill of attainder? What if traffic court is a private business not within the government? That's how Black's Law Dictionary describes franchise courts. Look it up for yourself. What if police supervisors are hiding these critical facts from their underlings? What if judges are hiding these critical facts from police? What if legislatures are hiding these critical facts from police? What if the truth on these matters are in state statutes that we are not very deliberately allowed to read and are difficult to find? What if the professors at police and criminal justice programs are hiding these critical facts from us? What if police are chronically and frequently violating their constitutional oath by not knowing these things or taking them seriously? Do policemen even care? Or is it only about the money and their pay and their benefits? What if it is a violation of the state constitution to hear a case in franchise court called traffic court against a party who never consented to acquire a license and who demands a jury trial? If indeed the civil provisions of the Vehicle Code apply to everyone, then why do we even need to apply for a driver's license? Who polices the police? Aren't they supposed to police each other? How can government impose duties on a non-consenting party without instituting voluntary servitude in violation of the 13th Amendment? Do police blindly follow orders like Nazis and illegally injure people and violate their oath with impunity by simply doing what they're told? Do policemen have the ability to finally think for themselves? Or did public/government school destroy that? The fact that people charged with learning and enforcing our laws don't ask these questions or try to answer them at a personal level causes the sovereign people they serve to distrust their government. It undermines the credibility of the government. It is a common source of fear, terror, and terrorism among the public. Undermines your job of protecting the public health and safety and morals. Who is the real terrorist?